Evo, nismo za sada dočekali.
So we're still waiting for our guest. She's going to be there in a minute, so we shall start. So officially, I would like to greet you all and to welcome you to this third day of BITEF Prologue and to this panel discussion, Edge of the New Theatre Season. This panel discussion is being implemented within the accompanying program of the BITEF And as you know, for many years, through these programs, we intend to nurture this critical spirit and to process some of the topics from the cultural area in a critical manner, but in a wider political and social context. This year, we thought it would be interesting to talk about theater and performing arts during COVID-19, and from the point of view of the cultural policy and from the point of view of the management in culture or theater production. In line with the situation, this whole festival and this panel discussion is organized, as you can see, out in the open, especially for this theater purposes. We have opened up this new stage actually, and those who did not want to risk by coming here, the whole program is available on YouTube. So this is just one example how we adapted to the situation. All this would not be possible without our important partners who actually became our friends over the years. I would like to thank the delegation of the EU in Serbia, especially Mr. Paul-Henri Presset, who is the head of the communication, information and the media in the delegation. EU Info Center, or the European delegation actually, together with EU Info Center, enabled this panel. And this is our joint program, since this is the introductory panel for this debate program that the delegation is going to organize throughout this autumn. And I would like to invite you to follow this. And there are going to be 4 culture talks, webinars that are going to deal with important topics for culture in Serbia, like cultural heritage, film industry, with a focus on digitalization, then festivals and the development of the audience during COVID-19. The second equally important partner in the implementation of this panel is the French Institute in Serbia. And I would like to personally thank Ms. Catherine Fodry, who is the cultural attaché from the embassy. This is actually her idea that we have elaborated further. So owing to Ms. Fodry, we have our French colleagues here on the panel. We thought it was very important to hear about this French experience. France is one of the first countries in Europe that managed to open up the theaters and cultural institutions since the pandemic started. So it's a special pleasure that this is a part of this Teatroscope program. Probably most of you already know that this is a regional program of the French Institute, and in the last few years they have contributed a lot to the development of the dialogue and exchange of experience between different actors in the cultural area in this part of Europe. So I would like to thank you so much for making this happen in this way. And now I would like to start with the first discussion. We have 2 talks. In the first one, we are dealing with this problem from the point of view of the cultural policy, and in this first panel we plan to have 4 colloquiators. Ms. Florence Portely, who is the mayor of Taverne, and the regional delegate from Ile-de-France. She's in charge of culture, and we are waiting for her to join us over Zoom. But we have Ms. Catherine Deventer, who is the Secretary General of the Association of European Festival. Thank you so much for being with us, Catherine. And we have 2 persons who are present here physically. Ana Ilic, who is the Senior Advisor of the Prime Minister for Tourism and Creative Arts, and Ms. Šešić, who is in charge of management in culture and cultural policies. And this panel will be moderated by my colleague Aleksandar Brkić, who is the professor at Goldsmith University of London, and Jelena Knežević, who is the executive director of BITEF. So after this general introduction, I will give the floor to my colleague Aleksandar to tell us more about this first talk. Thank you, Jelena. First of all, I have to get used to these excellent measures that BITEF team has introduced, and I would like to welcome you because these are very adequately Vera Konjovic and Ivan Medenica called this BITEF Agora, and this is something that I think is quite necessary, not only for Serbia but other countries as well lately. And this is why we decided to talk about these topics, maybe even to shout out, because someone has to hear us. And we are dealing with different policies during the pandemic, but we thought that we are not dealing with this with these cultural policies enough, especially policies about the performing arts, both in Serbia and across Europe. So the first part of this talk today is focused on different angles from which we may be dealing with the cultural policy or policies.
From the UK that I come from, where different things are on the table when it comes to cultural policies and performing arts. There are different tests done by Mr. Weber, by others, and trying in different theaters to see and test what these new measures could mean in the pandemic context. We are seeing that it is not really working out too well. And there have been in the region some theater festivals, like, for instance, the Dubrovnik Summer Theater Games, again under a special regime, all the way to the heroic attempts by BITEF, with the huge efforts of the whole team, wanting to discuss what is possible and what we are doing, not only right now, but what we can be doing in the future, because we believe that theater and performing arts are important, maybe not as important as some other fields that have surfaced in the pandemic as the key ones, but we are deeply convinced that they are essential. And the speakers that we've gathered today have different experiences in the course of this pandemic, looking at it from different perspectives and in different ways. And therefore, we don't only want to look at the past, what was, what we've experienced since the onset of the pandemic. Rather, we want to hear things that we can do in the future in the field of cultural policies to make theater possible. So we can start our debate today with our guests. And Ms. Portelli is not yet with us. We can start with Anna Ilic or Katrin. Katrin, can you hear us?
Da li mi čujemo glas? Bitno je da nas Katrin čuje i da publika čuje nešto. Tehnika, signal. Ja ću svejedno postaviti pitanje.
We cannot hear Katrin. So my question is, we are starting from the festival, from the model that we are currently in. Katrin is representative of the European Festival Network, among other things, many other different platforms. And very interesting for us is to hear, although festivals are a production model, but in the current age of festivalization and European life, festivals have become much more than just that. Could you, Katrin, share with us some ideas, some solutions, some tactics that festivals, members of the network, or other festivals that you're aware of, have tried since the onset of the pandemic, which made it possible for theater and other arts to actually happen.
Yes, with great pleasure. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Da, mi ne čuju sa tri.
Can you just confirm that you can hear me on the screen?
We cannot hear you, Katrin.
Mi ne čujemo Katrin.
We don't hear Katrin. So here we see the new circumstances of the pandemic. We now need headsets, but the interpreters cannot hear Katrin.
Evo, ja sad molim sve da uzmu slušalice pa da...
Sad ne. Katrin,
Can we try, Katrin, a sentence from you?
Samo ovaj deo. Samo ovaj deo nam treba. Koji kanal?
pokušam.
Ništa, ajmo
Okay.
da. Možemo da krenemo, evo, verovatno se sad nešto tamo restartuje.
Until we get the technical aspects sorted out, let's start with questions for our speakers who are physically present here. Maybe this is the safest for right now. So, Anna, we've managed to hear some European experiences, and I know that you've been abreast of what other governments have been doing. So my first question for you, based on these European practices, what do you think that our government, how it approached the situation under the pandemic in the field of cultural policy? Can you tell us a little bit about how this evolved in our case? Thank you, Jelena. We need a mic here for the speaker. Here it is. Good day, Jelena. Throughout the pandemic and the emergency situation, we've been watching what other countries are doing in order to know how to adjust and what to do. And of course, everyone was confused. It wasn't always possible to respond right away, but we were watching carefully the developments elsewhere. Of course, the key areas needed to be supported first to enable continuity of normal life and to ensure economic measures for citizens. And this was done through many different packages of economic support for economic operators, entrepreneurs, many of which come from the creative sector. And so far, 3.4 billion euros have been appropriated for financial incentives. Along with this, there were also tax moratoriums, loan moratoriums, so that at the first stage, we facilitate the life of citizens, but then we ask ourselves what else can be done. And the first thing that we did was open up a portal for all digital contents, Digital Solidarity, RS, where we collected all the digital content, and much of it was actually in the field of culture. We were all pleasantly surprised by museums and theaters who made their content available, although it was not made specifically for this, but it was made right away available. There have been so many virtual exhibitions and theater performances, and it was really good. And in this way, these institutions reached a big audience and the diaspora. And the next thing that was done was support for freelance artists who were most at risk and most vulnerable. And they are, until now, the only group that received direct financial support. So their role has been recognized, specifically their role under these pandemic circumstances when people have the need for content, for the state of the mind. And after that, after the emergency situation was over, we soon introduced measures, for instance, to continue filmmaking with foreign producers. They wanted to start working again with the particular measures in place, so that since May, filmmaking is going ahead without any problem, quite smoothly in an organized way. And after that, once conditions were provided, the next group of activity that started working, along with some measures in place, were exactly theaters, concerts in the field of culture, not massive ones, but those with up to 500 people in the audience, with the approval of the crisis management team. So these were some milestones, along with the measures that are in place for outdoor and indoor events. And we were also encouraged in July when UNESCO published its report stating that the government of Serbia in the field of culture and creative activities responded very well and did its best. Of course, we could have done other things. There are other possibilities, including freelance artists, but then we also became aware of some weaknesses in our system. And if it wasn't for them, we could have responded even better. But this is a lesson learned for us for the coming period in terms of what we need to improve in our system, so that in the future, if this situation is prolonged, we can respond even better. Yes, I was all the time interested why first measures were addressing the cinematography, filmmakers. We've just heard the answer from you, but let me ask you an additional question. Is this also a sign of some inert attitude of our theater makers, or is it that cinematography is different and it is in the focus because of its commercial effects? Was that why it was a priority? No, that wasn't the case. It wasn't a strategic decision. It was rather their proactive approach. Once the emergency situation was over, it was practically the end of the theater season. It was expected that performances will continue outdoors. Regretfully, then there was another peak. So it seemed that theaters were slower to respond. On the other hand, there were many projects on hold with many people involved, not only actors, but other supporting industries, including hospitality, hotels, and other sectors that support production. Thank you, Anna. Let's check now whether we can hear our foreign speakers. Professor, we've heard what's been done. What, in your opinion, has been missed out? What we've missed to do under the pandemic? Or more importantly, what can be done now and what it is that you would recommend as priorities in case that the pandemic drags on? Of course, I think always there is so much that one can do even under regular conditions. We could do more, and many decisions, system-wide decisions can be made to make the system better regulated and organized, not only in terms of possible future crises, but because a well-arranged system is much needed. I think that at the first moment, the panic was quite high among the general public at all levels of government as well. And the first task at that time was health and security. And health and security could best be preserved by saying we are now under lockdown, we stop everything, and we do not differentiate between different types of institutions of culture. In that respect, I was expecting more from the Ministry of Culture itself, because it is not at all the same going to see an exhibition in a museum. The other day I went to the Museum of Contemporary Art. It is very safe and much safer than a performance. But I think there was also a wrong idea that the city of Belgrade started from, saying that all theaters would perform at one place. That was not good. We needed site-specific performances. Just imagine the number of courtyards in Belgrade, in Krunska Street, in many other areas, specifically for the citizens of that city neighborhood. People can even watch from their balconies. So our city neighborhoods have not been used sufficiently. Košutnjak, Topčider, the Kalemegdan Fortress neighborhood as exceptional places for performances. So this was one weakness, but you will discuss this with managers in culture. But preconditions were not met for theaters to go out, to go among the public and to engage in specific genres of theaters, because there are, out of the institutions, theaters who could do this. Yes, there were financial incentives for freelance artists, but assistance for non-institutional cultural scene was not provided. Theater, music, and otherwise. It wasn't offered. The city of Belgrade ended its competition for incentives. The ministry delayed its own. Many countries in the world, like Czech Republic, Austria, and others, did appropriate funds planned for these competitions, and it was up to institutions or independent organizations to say what they will be using it for, because otherwise, obviously, they will not be able to use it as planned, festivals with big audience and so on. And it was exactly in the independent scenes that we have projects targeting small, specific audiences in urban neighborhoods. Therefore, in my opinion, we still need to work towards these and to discuss many things and encourage artists to carry on and implement their projects as best they can.
I would just like to add something. I completely agree with Professor. We could have been more creative altogether. More importantly, I forgot to mention that in theaters, no one stopped working. Actually, people who had some contracts that were expiring. Everyone got their salaries, their contracts were extended, and so on. And the money, all these competitions from the ministries were implemented, and there were some delays, that's true. Maybe they could have adapted to the situation even further. Maybe I would suggest that for the future. It wasn't ideal, but still it wasn't that bad. But we could have been more creative, I agree. If I may just add something, I have been listening to this first part about the things that have been done. I was never in power. I am not in, I don't plan to, but it's very interesting from your position. How does it actually look like? I mean, now, if you are in charge, you come from Prime Minister's office, you have to talk to some other people in the government in a moment of crisis. And do you have to explain why it's necessary to give support to culture and art, film, not theater maybe? How does this look like in our government right now? Well, these are the processes at the crisis headquarters. Are you in this headquarters? No, not officially. I only come when they talk about these topics. So you just drop by. Yes, exactly, I drop by. So these talks are really intense. The problem is, of course, medical profession. From their point of view, they would just close down everything until the virus passes, and then until we are all healthy. But life must go on, and in that sense, we have been fighting all the time to move these boundaries. So we had to struggle for the festival as well. It was a huge struggle. They kept saying festivals cannot be implemented, we cannot do that, but sometimes that you need to compromise. And for festivals specifically, I really have to praise all of them, because the whole industry was suggesting so many measures and how they can change, adapt, readjust. So they were very, very active. So this is a great way to switch to Catherine. Can we hear Catherine now? I just wanted to say that I've been waiting for our technical team to tell us that it's possible to connect with our guests as well. If it's not possible, then we will continue talking, but let's see, Catherine. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you. I expect from our technical team to tell us when we can hear from Catherine. And after that, we will just continue. We apologize to Catherine because she's only able to listen to us. We hope that by the end we'll be able to hear from her as well. So another question for Anna. I am under the impression that all the time we have this accountability. We are aware that the festivals are not safe, or theaters, they're not completely safe, but then they say yes, but how can the malls function, or gym, or any other commercial sectors? So that is the question for you. Actually, I understand that during this crisis headquarters, it's very difficult to fight for the role of theater. But I see that some other people, some other areas which are even less safe, manage to obtain some things. So how, to which extent is theater actually important in our society? Yes, I do understand the question, but if you are to ask the owners of nightclubs, they would complain because they have restricted hours, restricted number of people. Nobody is actually happy or totally satisfied, but theaters and cinemas got the opportunity to open. So you have to be careful because things can go out of control, and there are concerts and weddings, and you have to be quite precise. And that's why there are some measures that are quite precise and they're prescribed, so it's defined. And the concerts are referred to the institutions of culture or within the institutions. So you cannot have all kinds of concerts. Of course, a lot of concerts and festivals were rejected because they wanted to have over 500 or 1,000 people. So some specific proposal of the concert comes, for example, Nataša Beklavac, no, not that kind, but those that can be under these measures that were prescribed, and these measures are very clearly defined. So most often they want to have up to 500 people, so you don't need any approval. If you want over 500 people, then you need to have some special permission. I'm so sorry that we don't have anyone from the Ministry of Culture, so we need to ask these questions to Ana Ilic, but I would like to move to another question about the future. As Jelena said, the pandemic is ongoing and it will last, but what happened, and what can we do, and what would you, as an advisor to the Prime Minister, say, knowing everything that happened? I mean, the scenario is we'll continue like this in the next year and a half or two, or I don't know. So what can we do in order to improve things? What is your advice for the future? Well, this could be a long answer because there are so many things. Maybe we can focus on theater. Yes, I'm referring to theater, actually. I will try to be very specific. I think that we should, of course, activate this venue. I mean, Corona or not, we don't have enough of these spaces, not closed spaces for some alternative experimental theaters, whatever. So these venues must be created. We intend to create a lot of that, and you always have the question of management. For example, the National Theatre will have some workshops here in Dorčol, very close, for this experimental and alternative troops and young people and theaters. But another thing that we should do is the status of these free independent artists. We are creating the software, and it's going to be transparent who is an independent artist and who is not. We will have these associations. We will connect them with the tax administrations, so you will be able to see if something was paid or not paid, and we'll have a clear situation for the future. But we have a lot of these independent artists that we cannot put anywhere. I mean, we need to participate through discussions and come up with some solutions and good proposals. So these are some first things. And we have the digitalization issue. This Corona has accelerated our digitalization, as said in UNESCO. But it would be good to create digital content, and then they would be able to earn money for the institutions. So something specifically created for the audience that is digitally following the work of the theater. So these are some brief proposals. Of course, the aging of the ensembles and things like that. I mean, we need to have the discussion on the law on theater. I think that Katrin is now able to talk, but before that, Mirjana, would you be able to comment about this? I mean, you have been following this development of cultural policies in different countries. We know what the government did so far. We heard about the ideas for the future. So what was happening in some other European countries at the level of cultural policies? What are the measures that would be interesting to hear about? Maybe some other countries in Europe did that. Well, first of all, I would like to say something stemming from Anna's answer and related to cultural policies of some of the European countries. Implicitly, we could understand that what brings some profit, these are the festivals. Actually, we have discussed about this the most. Not production, not the work of the ensemble, I'm not saying that the government should discuss about that. They don't have the time to discuss about that, not about the internal functioning of the theater, of course, but that's an important topic that they should have talked about and discussed. The creation of digital content and interactive digital content. Some museums did that as their own initiatives. For example, the Museum of Yugoslavia, they have this project UDOM, and I don't know how many people wanted to participate in something like that. There were some attempts like that at the level of theater, of course. I was watching some plays about the achievements in theater. That is not a substitute for a theater play, but it enables an ensemble, at least in this virtual space, to gather around an idea and to discuss about this concept, about this narrative. Even if everyone is in their own room, they produce together one artwork. So we said that after that we'll talk about the management in culture, but the biggest mistake, I'm talking about the world level, global level, and within the management in culture, we do not discuss about the specificity of these institutions. So we have Philharmonic Orchestra or Symphonic Orchestra. So it's not the same to have the management of one institution. I mean, that could be close to management of school or something like that. But if you have the artistic ensemble, the situation is quite different. You cannot even find that in literature. What kind of specific features are there? What kind of leadership do you need? How do you accomplish to have this spirit of the ensemble? Not what you learn about the classic management, about the organizational culture and so on, but the spirit of ensemble. That's something, something completely different. We are here in front of this building, and it does not have its own ensemble, but we started like that. But Bojan Stupica said that he doesn't want to work in the house without an ensemble. And you need to cherish that, to nurture that. And I haven't heard anything about that, not only here, but anywhere in the world. No one was talking seriously about this. But there was some serious art directors of some serious art theaters, and they considered this topic, and then it happened. We have something which is contraindicative. So we have this filming of films or series. So they have engaged all these people who work in the theater. So it's very difficult. There were some interviews regarding how difficult it is to establish the work of the ensemble. I had the need to say this because no one is writing or talking about this. The best institutions, actually those institutions that manage to do something, even virtually, they manage to conserve the spirit of the ensemble. Maybe they needed to enable the people to work. According to some research that we did, Milena Stefanovic and myself, this actually happened where the directors of these institutions had such ambition and desire to preserve something. There were the other people who were working routinely. They're not doing anything. They're just waiting for the ministry to say something, or the secretariat, the city or provincial secretariat. So we got a lot of answers that people are complaining. They did not call us from the ministry. Nobody was worried how we are. People did not call us and so on. So they just send this memo and that's it. And our reaction was the following. We asked, well, wasn't that great? So you have your freedom to make decisions and act. And they said, no. Obviously, you know who is appointing the leadership and the management, so those managers are afraid not to make a mistake. They don't want to risk, and this situation with the pandemic is quite a risk. And this gathering is a risk as well. So you should be brave in order to do something that perhaps in the end will have a negative consequence. Maybe it will open up some new worlds and new paths, and we see how the audience was so happy to see Vasa Železova, to come to theater, to feel this, even though there were some gaps, but that's a theater. Anna, I just wanted to add to agree that there was this excellent concert in the National Theatre, and the audience was so exhilarated because they were present. But one of my pieces of advice would be to finance the projects in theater and to dislocate that from the ministry to a special fund for culture, or maybe we could have some special theater funds, funds for visual art or whatever, like fund for science, or what the colleagues from Creative Serbia mentioned. We talked with them many times, and like the film center is functioning. So we would not only finance the projects, but we would support them, we would help the distribution, mobility, exchange, and so on. And in these situations, we could react more quickly to adapt to a specific situation. Let me just summarize. Arm's Length Body Arts Council is financing outside the ministry towards the independent, or something like in Croatia, which is somewhere in between. Shall we start again, Jelena? Katrin? Katrin?
Katrin, mi se nadamo da si zapamtila pitanje.
I hope you remember the question from the beginning.
Yeah, great. Can you then go back to the question that I asked, and if you can share with us some experiences?
Yes.
Yeah.
Shall we start the discussion all over? So thank you very much for the invitation. And this is live in Corona times. It's not the first time that this happened. And I always feel a bit external, actually. Sit there on the screen above you, or above the audience, and talk to you like that. I wished I was there. It would be another talk that I'm doing now. A lot has been said now already, of course, during this discussion. And a lot of solutions that festivals were giving, and solutions that came from the government side, were also already shared. What we experienced as European Festival Association was an incredible energy that the festival makers invested in the past 6 months. Not only into one edition of their festival, but into 3, 4, 5 different kinds of editions of their festivals that were either cancelled or postponed or had to be put online. So the resilience of the sector, the resilience of people that were behind those festivals is incredible. Coming up with new solutions of outdoor festivals, as I said, online festivals, site-specific festivals programming only local artists, not the international artists that needed to travel to the countries. Some festivals, like the Reykjavik Arts Festival, prolonged its festival for a year-long activity. And they said, we are implementing this festival as long as it takes, with interruptions as many as we have to do, but we will do our entire festival. And just like that, I think governments also came up with a lot of solutions. Not all, and never sufficient, but there were some emergency funds, there was some money dedicated to the arts and cultural sector. Also foundations like the European Cultural Foundation and others, the Allianz Foundation, launched, so to say, solidarity funds for that. But my main point is what you said before, is what this means for the future, what this means for the conclusions that we can draw from this. On the one hand, of course, the conclusion is that the sector is incredibly vulnerable, it's incredibly resilient at the same time, and it I think, shows the immense responsibility of public authorities right now to invest and to take up all that energy that has been invested by the sector for the public space, for reinventing our human contact and our activity. Which means, first of all, that we need time. In 2021, We cannot just rush on and add on new solidarity actions and new forms. Political decision makers. Like this very otherwise fantastic example, and I think it's the responsibility of the BITEF Festival to offer this kind of time. We need in the Prime Minister's office not only a fantastic person that drops by, but we need a person that is permanently, constantly, in the ministry, of course, in Prime Minister's office, wherever it is, open and brings these points that we, civil society, also have to do our duty, that we assemble, that we bring together. Milena mentioned very practical, very concrete concerns, how very concrete measures could be taken. We need to take our duty in order to formulate but that's our responsibility, I think, all together. We cannot allow for citizens and for people to have less access to arts and culture, less exposure to artistic diversity. We cannot allow any form of censorship in our sector. I think this kind of political dialogue between politics and civil society is incredibly important and has been accentuated through this crisis. Have you heard me?
Yes. Hvala, Catherine.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. This was a bit less than we expected from you, but we had technical issues. We wanted to ask you also many other things from the perspective of the festival as an elusive form, which is different than institutions mentioned by Professor Šešić. Festivals possibly had more entrepreneurial spirit to address this kind of risk, and we are seeing this on the example of BITEF. And maybe we should wrap up this first debate, this first part, and for the end, let me ask one question of you. Let us now, this is crisis management. I'm very sorry that we didn't hear Ms. Portelli, but we commit to do subsequently a video because it is very interesting for us to hear these different experiences. And we are inviting Ms. Badri when we ask from the audience for questions to tell us more. If not, we will let Ms. Portelli do a video later on, and others will be able to see it later on our YouTube channel, which will be part of this debate. So this will be the solution. So let's try to give at least a little time to the audience. But first, myself, it is quite exclusive that we have live audience before us. Maybe you don't see it, but we do have with us here about 900 people. I am counting the audience, but we have, joking aside, we have some audience at safe distance, and it will be nice to hear some questions from the audience, either for Catherine or for Anna or Professor Šešić. So please, if you have some intervention, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Do we have a microphone for the audience? Thank you. First of all, let me welcome and greet all the speakers, and
which I think is very nice. Zahvaljujem se kako
I thank the BITEF organizers and our great speakers. I have a question for Anna Ilić, which is assistance and developing different spaces which have been neglected, and how to make a transit and make them into spaces that are very, very well suited for production. This, of course, is a very important question, and we are already working on it. I must commend the foundation Novi Sad, European Capital of Culture, because this is exactly what they are doing intensely in Novi Sad. and they are having these 10 cultural stations, as they call them, in different neighborhoods. So they have these fantastic public spaces, and they've written, at our request, a manual for other communities to use old factories or other neglected spaces and turn them into creative cultural spaces. We will be doing this intensely in Belgrade, under the Gazela Bridge. The industrial center will be turned into a cultural hub for ateliers, studios, and performance stages. We plan to do it in some other locations. And we will do a legacy project of the European Capital of Culture, which is the national capital of creativity. So within Serbia, we'll be selecting cities and municipalities which are capitals of creativity for a specific year. So this program is planned as a long-term program which will cover regeneration, refurbishing certain spaces, and designing programs, building human capacities, particularly at local level. And in this way, we want to strengthen cultural management at local level, at community level, so that the whole supply of culture in small communities is strengthened and enhanced, because people are leaving these small communities for lack of culture, among other reasons. And that is why we want to improve this. And this program will not be intended for Belgrade and Novi Sad, but only for smaller towns and communities. Other questions? My question is for Katrin. I hope Katrin can hear us.
But didn't have time to analyze it or to develop this thesis. You mentioned that international performing arts festivals develop different scenario strategies, how to deal with this situation. Of course, in this very moment, this initiative is the most important thing, that there are different strategies which we develop, but is it already time, or it is too early to make a kind of evaluation? Do you have a certain feedback? Could you propose already upon the experience we have had in the last 6 months what would be better solutions, so to say? Or you think that we are still in the situation in which the very activity, intention to make festivals is the most important one?
Thanks for the question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think if you would ask festival makers right now that are running, like BITEF now, the Prologue and others all across Europe, Mittelfest in Italy, and many, many other festivals, you would not get an answer. That's what I feel in our different Zoom meetings that we do in the European Festival Association on the longer term perspective. And conclusions that one could draw. Because what I feel now is immense energy and focus, concentration on implementing the duty that festivals here to bring arts back to daily life, back to the public space, bring it back to the future. This is it's a day by day kind of work at the moment is done. I feel the very moment of that festival that is working. Little change. Little actually circulation, people and ideas, just focus on that, on what is possible, and also refocusing, because what was possible yesterday is not possible today and will not be possible tomorrow. So there is I think, almost limit on that resilience and on the flexibility that has been provided by makers and by artists, the entire sector, and many other sectors as well. At the same time, I think those that already have challenges, because they were in the very beginning of the epidemic phase and they've done online activities mainly, I think there is a very general that can already be drawn in this discussion online, physical. That there is, of course, a certain added value of online digital component that we will take with us in the future, which we actually started before the epidemic crisis. The digital online environment is part of our practice of programming, of reaching out to audiences, of education is way before the epidemic crisis. But what has been shown here, I think, also by research of academics, the life experience will not be replaced by the online or digital festival format that one can offer due to so many complex dimensions of interaction, not for the lack of technical perfection as we can see in this very moment, also due to very human nature, I think, of people that need to come together around arts and by coming together around the arts and the aesthetics and the discussions around aesthetics, I think this is of what we call community building happens, and that beauty for festival makers allow this community building to happen. So I think that's for us one of the most important contributors right now, that digital will not replace the physical, so we will fight on for the physical part of the festival. And I think a second one in the national festival scene is that we should not allow international arts to cease or to stop to this very moment. Festival as international platform and artistic co-productions is important also for the future.
Catherine, thank you. Thank you for your answer. We still had technical difficulties during your whole speech, but we heard half of it.
Catch points, yeah.
Wow.
Da, evo, sada bi mogli da završimo.
With this now, we could wrap up this first panel. Due to the technical difficulties, we've run over time a little bit. I thank very much our speakers who participated. And I invite you to stay in the audience because we move on right away to the second thematic part. I thank our participants, and I invite right away the new speakers for the debate and panelists to join us for the second session. We will hear and see now. Let me please ask you to either disinfect or change the mics for speakers.
Evo, sačekat ćemo.
We will have to wait a minute until everything is ready. I will now like to begin with this session. Once again, welcome to all of you who joined us later. We are starting now the second debate within the panel on the edge of the new theatre season. As you've heard, in this second part, we will deal with theatre art from the perspective of theatre production and management in culture. And now I will introduce our panelists. We will see who will stay with us until the end. So we have Mr. Here they are. Francis Peduzzi, director of the Institut National in Calais, Ms. Dubravka Vrgoc, director of the Croatian National Theatre and screenplay writer, and Vida Sivara Divojevic, director of Belgrade Theatre, and Ms. Cvetkovic, art historian, manager of a number of platforms and organizations in the independent scene. Alexandra and myself are still moderating. Let me give you a brief introduction for this second panel. The idea being that in this part we discuss some specific models that we can implement to make theater possible at the time of crisis. But then we understood that possibly discussing models is a little bit too pretentious because we are still making ad hoc tactics rather than having a system-wide model that can then become part of the management theater in culture. And being a festival producer, I myself was at a loss when we are preparing for this festival. We were always on a jigsaw, wanting the festival to happen and not wanting to put anyone in jeopardy and spread the virus. So actually in this, we were thinking of new, safe formats and concepts that could respond adequately to the existing circumstances. When we discuss culture management, what we've done is very much crisis management or agile and resilient management, because uncertainty is something that is now expected. And throughout this time, we've tried to manage uncertainty with our iterative processes and adjustments. Equally important to mention, as we've heard from Professor Šešić in part one, is that when we discuss crisis management, it is good to mention also the human factor, the people who accept to do crisis management, because this truly is quite a specific cognitive emotional situation, which implies big tolerance to insecurity, even confusion. So you have to live it, you have to work under these conditions that are not at all pleasant. So on the one side, I'd like us to discuss some of these specific production tactics, while on the other hand, the human aspect. And Alexander, you can now continue. Let me welcome Mr. Peduzzi once again and ask him a question. You've managed very quickly, very soon, to open your center, Le Chanel, and to find ways to make it financially viable and sustainable. Can you tell us how you managed to transform your work, and what are these key components and things that have changed in the way that you operate?
Well, I don't know if we have invented many things or changed many things, but the first thing that I would like to say is that I completely agree with the previous panelists. We need to bear in mind today the situation as it is. We need to adapt. This is something new for every one of us, and we have a situation which is not so obvious or open towards us. If we look at the previous 6 months, I don't know how it looks like in other countries, but here in France, we have, to say the least, some restrictions, instructions which are not always clear. They don't tell us what we should actually do. So it's not clear. You can open the institution or not. How can you receive the audience or not? So it's so vague. So the first challenge is to do the deciphering of these instructions by the government, so what the authorities say. And the authorities tell us what we are allowed to do and what we are not allowed to do. So when you decipher that, at the same time, you have this margin to interpret these instructions and to adapt to the situation ad hoc. So let me be more specific. When we are supposed to, when we opened up from the 1st of September, like the schools are starting and we have a new season in September and October, so we have something, I mean, we made a bet actually. We said that the situation is not going to be completely resolved in September and October. We expected to have some restrictions, that less people are going to come. And we wanted to just settle with the objective reality that we need to consider. So if the authorities say, okay, the audience need to wear masks, they need to wear the masks. If we are not allowed to have more than 300 people in the audience, we need to work with that. If they tell us that there should be some space between the individuals or groups of people that are coming together, families coming to theater and so on. So, but we wanted to preserve this because, how would I put it? We wanted to preserve the actual identity of the live play and live performance, and that is this community, this getting together, the place where people gather in order to have some joint experience. So a very important parameter that we did not want to delete and to neglect is what the audience feels and experiences. If you have a hall for 500 people in the audience, if we literally comply with the social distancing, then we could have 140 people in the hall that receives 500. And what is the experience when you go into this hall and it's half empty? I think that people need to feel as audience. In order to feel as audience, they need to feel connected mutually. So this distancing is very important, and it's necessary for the performers on the stage to feel this human liveliness, this mass, and how they react to what they do. People who are on the scene have this actual feeling. I mean, they are talking to this audience, that it's not only a few hundred people. I mean, if they are not connected in the audience, then the idea of live audience is disappearing. And let me tell you, in the end, we had to, I mean, we wanted to invent this structure, which is not going to be a classical audience, but that will enable physical distancing. So we need to have this sanitary security and safety, but at the same time, you have the possibility, so everyone who is on the scene, on the stage, can have the possibility to have the feeling of this human gathering and joyness, and we should not lose this specific feature of live audience, of live performance, because if we lose this homogeneity of the audience, it makes no sense to have these plays. That's why we wanted to preserve and to keep this feeling. We tried with some tricks in order to comply with everything that was instructed. I have one further question. At the time when you are fighting for to keep this togetherness, we are always thinking whether that is financially feasible. How did you resolve this issue? Well, concerning the situation that we have right now, I mean, that's more or less like that. There are certain costs that have been anticipated and that did not come through. We have some new costs that were not anticipated. So we tried. First of all, I have to say that we need to try to create this balance. It was a fine-tuning, but in any way, we are lucky because we are a nationally recognized structure. We have significant subsidies, and we are lucky because we have this construction which was financially sound before the pandemic. So financial situation allows us, at least this year, to sustain this shock of additional costs and additional expenses. So this issue is not being, this is actually not an issue for us, so we don't have a difficult situation, that's for sure. Dubravka Vrgoč, who is the director of the Croatian National Theatre. Can you hear me? The National Theatre from Zagreb, after this initial shock, actually, initiated different activities during pandemic, and you had your own special strategies and tactics. Could you share with us how you approach this, and what did your theater do starting from the pandemic until now, and what are your plans for further? First of all, hello. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be with you in Belgrade, but I am here. So Croatian theater was closed on in the summer. No one told us anything. We decided that it was a problem, so we just closed down. And this decision to not to be with the audience was quite surprising, especially because the last season the theater was 95%. We had a completion rate of 95%. I was quite surprised. I didn't know what to do further, so we managed in 5 days to have this connection. So we would never thought to be able to connect with this commercial media. So what made this quite interesting is to preserve, to keep our audience. We were lucky because we had 40 DVDs with our plays that we were recording quite professionally with Croatia Film Company, because we wanted to have this co-production. We wanted to show that. But we, on the 18th of March, after we have closed down. So we closed down on the 12th of March, and 18th of March we started with this broadcasting. So in a month and a half we had 1.5 million visitors. So people in the States were watching, in Philippines, in different continents. Children on online studies had this as their exercise, to watch the plays and to write essays. So we became quite popular. And after some time, this online version was interesting, but of course, it's very difficult because you don't have a live contact with the audience, and we were trying to think of the program, which is called Croatian National Theatre in your district. So on the 22nd of March, Zagreb had an earthquake. And in a way, we wanted to bring theater closer to the citizens, because that was a quite traumatic period for our citizens. So we, at the beginning, did not get a green light to gather so that the theater can go out on the streets. So there was some pressures and lobbying, and we managed on the 4th of April to start singing in Zagreb districts. So we gathered our best singers, and together with this, with the accompanying musicians, they started walking, and in the center of the city, which was affected by the earthquake. So only 5 people were allowed to gather at that point. And we had we were allowed to sing only for 20 minutes. And it was incredible that our oldest audience came, and they were actually the people who were at risk the most. And people were crying, and that was something that I will never forget. At that point, you realize how important the theater is. After that, we started singing in other districts, Mamutica, so New Zagreb, and the building with thousands of people. We were singing in front of the building, and people were listening from their balconies. So we then went to other places in Zagreb, to the city center. So more and more people were listening. They joined us, and it was like a party. There were children, older people, all generations were present, and we actually felt that we all missed the theater, and of course it was quite emotional. Just for a second, I need to interrupt you, because I think that it would be interesting to hear from you, Gradivojevic, and to have this dialogue, and then we'll go back to this. What about Belgrade response to what Dubravka said, since it's a similar model? So what did you do? I mean, what Belgrade theater drama did, and you were proud of that? What are the examples of good practice that we can share? Thank you for the invitation. Belgrade Theater of Drama is lucky to have its own courtyard, and we turned that into a stage. Unfortunately, we will be playing only in September. I expected to start earlier, but these measures were restrictive. So although in May already we were able to go out in our yard, and we had the scene with all the necessary organizational features and possibilities. We are talking about 160 persons in the audience. We had full capacity, and we had 8x8 stage, and we enabled the audience to follow our repertoire in quite complying conditions. So we concluded that the audience was eager, but now they are actually considering everything, and they buy the tickets usually one day before the play or even on the exact day. That was not the case because our theater before a year ago have this a system of 3 monthly plays, and we sold the tickets for the plays that were very popular, so people had to buy them 3 months in advance. So that's a change that happened. And on the other hand, there are a lot of people coming, so maximum capacity. We had 7 plays so far, and we were almost completely full. Of course, that was 50% of our capacity that was allowed, but our experience from all this regarding the Belgrade Theatre of Drama, we will enable the audience next year to, I mean, if, of course, there are conditions for that. We hope that the theater will be feasible in May, in June, maybe with some break in July, and in August and September as well. We'll try to adapt the space additionally. Maybe we could have the roof if it rains. Or actually, this situation provoked us to consider things and to be more creative, to be more open in this approach. And night after night, we are looking at this ambiental space. The audience is very disciplined. They come with masks. We measure temperature. We have these barriers with all the alcohol disinfectants and so on. So that could be something for the future. Because, of course, we cannot even assume how long this is going to last. But I am quite optimistic by nature, and I think that in August next year, Broadway assumed that they would have full capacity in August. So I hope that next year. So I hope that we'll be able to return to normal by then, because of Corona, we have the problem of togetherness, exchange of energy, intimacy. All these things in theater are disrupted, and we don't have, as we may conclude, we don't have a problem to organize the audience. We have a problem from the inside, how to secure to work safely and without obstacles. That's the biggest problem. It's not a problem to share, to divide the capacity and to do that. So basically, we will be able to work on that. I would like to thank our Prime Minister that enabled all the theaters to have regular testing whenever that's necessary. That's very important to say that Belgrade Drama Theater tested over 140 people who work in our theater. Of course, they were all negative, thank God, but we can only assume what would have happened if only one person of these 140 is positive. Maybe you can tell us about the mood and the atmosphere between the people, how difficult it is to be a manager and to keep up the spirit of togetherness and to motivate the people to work in these extraordinary activities. Well, it's very positive. It's a positive atmosphere. Maybe you wouldn't expect that at first sight, but we never had a situation that any of our employees in theater had any fear and or anything like that. They all wanted to continue working, and we need to play the plays as they are. So there is no redirecting the plays. So maybe as a director, I'm doing Bayaga's musical in Terazije, so now I'm forced to come up with a concept that otherwise would not have existed because of this whole situation. We'll see how this is going to look like in October at the premiere. Not only as a manager, but as an artist, you need to think in a different way. And let me just briefly say that Corona will pass sooner or later. In a way, we are conquering it by playing, and we will keep playing. But the biggest problem, as Professor Šešić already mentioned, is our situation without the theater law. I know that the Secretariat for Culture of the city of Belgrade is starting with this initiative. They are waiting for the new composition of the Ministry of Culture, and unless by the end of next year we have the theater law, our situation in theaters will not be defeated by Corona. We will be defeated because of this situation. I mean, it's impossible. It's becoming impossible to have projects, and especially since our theater has these type of plays with the ensembles. So people from the inside have a great desire to participate in the theater work. Of course, they opt for television or film. We know why. And I'm asking everyone, I mean, this is an important thing. It is my great desire for this ensemble of Belgrade Theater of Drama. I mean, I grew up here. My father was a manager in Vranje of the Vranje Theater for 30 years. But how can you work with this and fulfill the desire of all these people working inside if we don't have this legal framework? That's the primary thing, and I would even make this a priority compared to this topic that we have been talking about for I don't know how many months.
In this respect, Marijana Cvetković, on behalf of the cultural station that is dealing with contemporary dance, and also being someone who here presents the independent cultural scene for performing arts, and outside of that also, I'd like to hear, since the beginning of the pandemic, from your perspective, completely different than the institutional theaters that we've heard so far, what's been happening, what's been going on, and what have been the activities or responses that happened in the independent scene as you see them. Good day to everybody. Sorry to wear these glasses, but the sun is coming directly into my eyes, so I need to focus. That's why the shades. First of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for making it possible at debates like this and panels like this to hear actors who are working outside of the institutions, outside of the commercial market, outside of the cultural industry. For us, this pandemic situation is, of course, a situation in which we share the limited conditions with everyone else, and this became quite clear and clearly understood in a disciplined way from the beginning. We closed our spaces, artists withdrew from active work on projects, and I wish to say that in addition to this, these conditions of work for us are practically normal. The independent cultural scene is not recognized by the legal framework, by the formal solutions which exist, which are recognized by the Ministry of Culture and local governments. And also, this is true of the regulations in the field of labor and so on, although as actors in the cultural domain, we are quite visible and quite strongly present. And under such a situation that we found ourselves in, the only thing that we could do, since many of our organizations lost any funding, meaning that there weren't activities or programs, they were not planned for summer and spring. So what we could do was try to redefine our own domain and manner of work, our own relations, putting emphasis on people, because in the independent scene, the only true resource is the people with their knowledge, skills, and ideas that they bring to culture. We don't have buildings, structures, equipment that we need to safeguard and manage, but we have people who are our key resource. And that is why the independent scene was the first one to see our collective step through dialogue, which was to establish or find ways of assisting these people, because it was quite clear that not only there weren't their projects, but they wouldn't be invited to travel, to work elsewhere, to go to festivals, and so on. So we needed to find ways to help these people and to enable them to keep designing and thinking about their work at their home through Zoom, Skype, and other platforms without seeing massive depression and making them give up on what they do. So looking at the broader picture, not only the independent scene, but the overall situation in performing arts, it seems to me that this is an opportunity for all of us together to start redefining the concepts that we are used to, the forms of organization that we are used to, the different structures that we think are unchangeable, but they are very much changeable. So this is an ideal situation when you have force majeure that makes you think in a safe manner, exchange ideas. So this is the right moment for that. So we need to ask ourselves, is theater only what we traditionally see as theater? So under the new law, can we now introduce other categories, other forms and actors working outside of the formal theaters, working in small profitable theaters? I think it is possible. And this law, like many other laws or frameworks or structures to promote culture, should finally be established as an area of dialogue and exchange. We've heard today that there will be new scenes provided and made available in Belgrade and in Serbia, but people who are most interested in this don't know about this. Why, for instance, aren't we part of this dialogue? So this is just one example. Reconceptualizing culture into an area of dialogue where we can all participate and be involved in exchange, producing new feasible solutions, is something that needs to happen now. We want now to open the floor for questions. Thank you very much for this. We've touched upon this balance between investing in institutions and the independent scene. It was obvious in the first panel. So Mariana, thank you for raising this topic. And I think this also opens room for questions from the audience and other speakers. Let me greet the BITEF Festival and my dear colleagues who are here, to Mariana, who comes from the independent scene, and Ivo Radivojevic, but I would like to ask a question of my dear colleague from the Croatian National Theatre, Ms. Vrgoc, who was a good partner. We've talked during the pandemics. My question is, since our two institutions are compatible, because we have three ensembles, drama, opera, and ballet, I saw your first concert, your first performance with part of your orchestra and some soloists. How did you continue working in opera? And how did the ballet continue to operate? Can you hear me? Thank you for asking this question. We opened in front of the theater in June the summer evenings program on an improvised stage. And throughout June and July, we started with ballet, so we will have throughout September concerts, drama performances, and ballet. These are free programs that bring together many people. They are a source of joy both for the artists and for the audience. We've opened already in May our institution. At that time, we had only concerts and ballet performances. And in opera, as for soloists, we need to ensure 2 meters distance, but this is also true for the orchestra. As for ballet and drama, there are no restrictions in place. We decided for our season, which starts today in our house, to do Plan A, meaning do as if everything is normal with big projects. So in September, we will have Carmen in a reduced composition and a COVID version, meaning no masks on the scene, no discussing COVID, but a smaller choir and a smaller orchestra without scenography, because the stage will respect the distance. As for ballet, it will continue as before, but in the hall it will be not 700 but 200 seating places, and there is also another alternative that possibly we will be in a position to fill every second chair in the audience. It is good to hear this. We expect you with your ballet, Gospoda Glembaevi, to hear you here in our theater. Stay safe and all the best to you. Thank you, Ivan. One question over there. Good day. I am Jelena Jankovic-Bebuš from the Center of Belgrade Festivals. And my question is for Jelena Knežević. I think now, related to the different topics mentioned in these two panels, there are different festival models we are seeing in the course of this pandemic, and it's slowing down and accelerating, that there is possibly a new festival model or models being established or developed, which is not necessarily bad. But the question is, what does this mean for old festivals like BITEF? We are seeing now this prologue. How do you see the future of BITEF next year, the double festival? This year's, which was put off, and what will this mean for festivals like BITEF, who always count on the community spirit, the collectivity that is achieved with the audience, between the audience and the artists? As for festivals, I think it is different when it is film or theater. I was thinking theater. As for theater, we've so far come up with the best solution that you are seeing right now. It was very important for us, as you said, and as Mr. Bertuzzi mentioned, to keep this feeling of community, of togetherness, and as Mr. Medenica said, on top of people who connect via Zoom, to have some that are physically present, like here. And as I said, we need continually to find the balance between, on the one hand, art happening, and on the other hand, strictly respecting the measures. And I think this happened to us. We couldn't find the right balance, not only in the theater, but in the society generally. Either we opened up too much, or we locked down too strictly with unsafe formats and performances. So what we think is needed to develop formats that are suited to this situation while preserving the art concepts. Another question from Ivan Medenica. Let's disinfect the mic first. Thank you. As art director of BITEF, I would not add anything to this response, except that I like to add something that we started discussing in the first panel, the search for some alternative spaces which will enable us to better implement pandemic measures. It is good, we've heard from Anna Ilic, there is this institutional initiative to carry out these projects. And it seems to me that this is a leitmotif for our discussion, for us to hear what we can do, to hear this from the authorities, and on the other hand, what we will put forward and recommend as our initiative and ask support exactly for that. You will be aware that last year, half of our festival was happening in the Belgrade port, when in those hangars you could do the performances, and these are big spaces with natural air conditioning. So we need both initiatives from the side of authorities, but our initiatives from the world of theater as well. The other day, when the prologue started, problems with the tone. What will we do next year if not everything is fine? So then there will be this idea to have BITEF in some alternative spaces, possibly again in the Belgrade port, something that our team sees as the best possible solution so far. Another question I'd like to raise is about another leitmotif, a question for Ms. Vrgoc and Mr. Jugradivojevic, and this is the law. Anna Ilic said, and you mentioned as well, that TV teams, producers were more proactive than theaters in pursuing their rights. Let me ask now, if theater managers wanted to continue working at the time when the Tashmaidan project failed, would that have been at all possible? Because these actors were already engaged in films. We know that Croatia has better law, better legal framework when it comes to this kind of engagements, and it seems to me that we have this elephant in the room in our theaters, which is the issue of permanently employed actors in ensembles who receive salaries, but then give priority to filming TV series or films. My question is, for Dubravka and Jug, can these problems be solved with a consistent managerial work, whether you provide encouragements or fines in the ensemble and encourage actors, or do we need to solve this in a legal manner? Is it up to the managers or is it up to the law? And what could the law in that case mean? So again, the elephant in the room. Is it time now, under the corona pandemic, for us to solve the issue of permanent employment in theaters, or moving on to contracts? Let's ask Dubravka Edjuk very, very briefly to respond, because the show is starting soon. In Croatia, we have a legal solution so that without the signature and approval of the theater manager, drama manager, nobody can have another engagement outside of the theater. I am managing 2 different theaters for 16 years, and I always manage to find a solution with actors when they play roles in TV series without interfering with their theater performances. So, yes, both the law, but also communication and management with the ensemble within theaters. Very briefly, I always encourage system-wide solutions. The law should be the basis. There are some situations where we need to have understanding, but generally speaking, it has to be solved in a system-wide manner, and I fully encourage the drafting and adoption of the law on theater as the basis for us to operate, to respond, because now it is a kind of negotiations and compromise solutions that are not always favoring the interests of theaters to make things function. Currently, we are in a difficult situation. The Belgrade Drama Theatre, the projects that did not happen at the time when they were planned, like, for instance, in December last year, we made a plan and we announced 10 new shows with schedules for actors. But then we had the pandemic, we had the starting of cinema and TV shows being made, and then the artists were engaged outside of the theater. And since there is our unspoken rule that they can miss 1 role per season, so they were all saying, let this be the one. So we need a system-wide solution in order to make progress and move on. Another question, I think, with which we will wrap up when we talk about solidarity of the theater communities and actors involved within it, I will ask the question to Mariana. Is the independent scene, in your opinion, shown greater solidarity compared to institutions? So please comment on this that Jug has said.
I would like to view this as a general cultural scene, whether it shows solidarity, so within the scene, whether the colleagues have supported each other and in which manner. Since, as I have said, in this independent scene, people are the only resource, the biggest resource, and any kind of law and the measures do not recognize them. Practically, maybe only this group of people of 2,000 independent artists, which are not on an independent scene, but we started this initiative and we have established this fund of solidarity for the cultural workers of Serbia, and I think that's important to mention in this context as a way in which, in the most critical time, will help them to survive. We have gathered the funds, we managed to agree with different foreign foundations that are supporting our projects to have some funds available for this purpose, and we wanted to help 150 people with some modest means. I mean, Belgrade, the city of Belgrade gave that to the 30,000 dinars to these workers. 1,668 people applied. There are so many people who work in the public institutions of cultures, but because they did not receive any help, and often they were the ones who were carrying the repertoire in Serbia. Mostly there were people from cultural industries, and that was a sign for us how this concept of creative industries is dangerous, because in the time of crisis it does not provide the means for survival of the people who work there. I'm not talking about the owners of the companies and so on. So we have extended this campaign. We wanted to gather more funds, and I'm inviting you to go to the website donations.rs and to find the link, Solidarity Fund, and help your colleagues in the area of culture, because obviously there is a lot of them. And I hope that after this we will all learn the lesson, and we should know how many of us are there and what is the solidarity culture that has to be the basis for this, because culture is the relationship between people and not some business. So thank you in advance if you're going to visit this website that I've mentioned and donate to this fund. Thank you, Mariana. I think this is the best way to finish this panel, with this message that solidarity is is important among this community, theater community, and we started talking about this topic, but we need to somehow keep this spirit of togetherness in the audience. I would like to thank Alexander for being with us. I would like to apologize to everyone because of these technical issues, and I'm sorry that you all have to sit there in the sun, but we had to expect things like that. We had to be ready for rain or sunshine, so it was expected. And all these disadvantages will be compensated by some additional videos. And I would like to thank the technical team. It was not easy for them because we were really ambitious about this, and we started with 2 YouTube channels, 2 languages, and we wanted to have online people who are there online and who are physically present, and so there were 3 languages. So this was an experiment in itself. So I'd like to thank everyone. So you can take a look at the play to be Ariel F. All of you who have the tickets, you can go through this temperature measuring and everything else. And if you don't have the ticket, you can stay here and watch the play over the screen. And you can also stay for the interview. Mr. Ivan Medenica will interview Ms. Erika Fischer, and we will find out whether digital theater is possible. And this is the right way to finish this, and this is the answer to the question on how we can develop the festivals further on. At 8 o'clock we have another play, the same play, and after that you can meet with the authors and we will finish this festival. So thank you all. Thank you, Dubravka, very good. I'd like to thank Francis, Jug, and Mariana. So thank you for being with us at the edge of the theater season.
Danas BITEF prikazuje predstavu Biti Ariela F. U